Now we're ready for the assembly step, which is probably one of the more critical ones in the assembly. So you can see I've got everything laid out. I've got my pieces arranged from the top furthest out to the in the bow there, kind of backwards to the way I have the side rails, but I have the top rail closest in, and then the third rail, second rail, and first rail. The reason I do that is any glue that gets spilled doesn't end up being wasted. You don't end up with a gap. I've done that on both sides. The other thing I've done is, I know I have 4 layers, so I have 4 skewers about the right length stuck in near each location where I'm going to be pinning the boat together. I may want to do more, but this is the minimum of what I want to do. 4 and then 8 at each end, of course. I've got my glue all ready to go, and these vinyl gloves that I get at Harbor Freight, they work great. Keep the glue from getting on your fingers and being transferred anywhere else. Real easy to just peel off and throw away. You've got everything laid out. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how we lay the glue. But before we get to that, there's the one other step that we need to take care of. Underneath each end of the boat, I do a regular old brick and just simply slide it under the hull. Hold the end of the hull up, just that, it's about 2 inches. And what that does is it lifts the bow and stern just a little bit. Now, this may actually be working against some of the steering things that I have to add back in with a skeg. However, this kind of gets the end of the boat up out of the water just a little more, and especially if you're dealing with waves, that upsweep at both ends. It's called rocker. Now, unlike a wooden boat where the rocker tends to be constant, mine tend to be flat in the middle and just raised slightly at each end. And I like the way they perform better that way, because having the ends down on the water can cause them to be hard to steer. It's the way I build. You don't have to do it that way. Just showing you how I do it. Now that we have everything laid out and our glue ready to go, the only other thing to mention before I start gluing these on is, remember how we scribed that line showing the overlap? We're only going to lay our glue inside of this line up to the edge. We're not going to go, we don't need glue inside of here, and we don't want glue running onto the floor. So it's just going to be in this thin area here, and the same on each level. We're only going to lay it in between the scribed line and the outer edge. And that way we don't waste glue, because like if we flip these over and put glue on the whole bottom, well, half of it, the whole fingertip width on the outside edge, hangs off, and it's all wasted glue. And as you know, Gorilla Glue is expensive. I've had people ask me about alternatives. People try all kinds of things. I like Gorilla Glue. It works for me. It's what I've used all along. I know people have used PL Premium construction adhesive. Nobody's had any complaints about it. It's what you want to do. I just know for me they work. And you've seen the pictures of me standing on top of my boats when they're straddled a sawhorse or a couple barrels. I know that the hull has strength that way. If you have something better, that's great. I might try it in the future, but for now I know this is, as from my own testing, the strongest adhesive between 2 sheets of foam, as well as the other step that I do of taking the perforation tool and perforating the foam surface just to make sure, because all those little holes end up being like a little tack. Glue only and foam only grabs the top layer, and when you put tension on it, it'll just peel that foam away. You put little tacks down in, and I've shown many times with peeling fabric off after I've glued it on with using this process. There's all these little bumps of glue down into the foam, giving it a deeper adhesion than just surface. That's why I do it. Another thing, you don't have to do it. Some people don't, some people do. Some people have come up with their own ideas instead of a roller. I know I have a couple other tools now that I've suggested for cheaper alternatives. So there's my alternatives that I've discovered so far. One that I believe was recommended to me by somebody else that is cheaper. I believe this is called an uncapping roller. Apparently, if you are into beekeeping, you'll use this to break the wax off the honeycomb in order to get the honey out of it. So uncapping has to do with removing the wax. They leave, as you can see, it's a different pattern, but it is poking into the foam. That is a cheaper alternative. I want to say it wasn't horribly much cheaper or more expensive if I remember correctly, but it might be easier for some people, or you may know somebody who has one. This one is a carpet roller. This is when you have two pieces of carpet, wall-to-wall carpet, that are being laid in, usually a deeper pile, and you have a seam running across the floor. They'll take this and they'll run it back and forth over the area where the edges are to try and hide them, work the fibers into one rug to the other and hide the seam. And I believe I got this at Lowe's for, I don't know, $15. As you see, it also leaves a different pattern. And there's that gap along the edges, but it does work, and you just have to go over it a little more. It leaves little square holes instead of round holes the way that one does, or the really pokey ones. Like these are actually like tacks stuck into a plastic roller. And I had one person that just made a piece of wood, put a bunch of screws through it with the tip sticking out, and went around and hammered that onto the foam. It does the same thing. All different alternatives. Just showing you options that I've found. So we're laying our glue in now for each layer. First I got to get the cap off, bend it back out of the way, and then just simply trying to lay a nice looping line along the edge of the hull, not making it too thick. It's nice and cold, but that way we know it doesn't have to be too thick. As I said, kind of want to make the loops kind of more or less continuous, just to make sure that there will be a good glue bond all along the seam. And this takes a little bit of patience. Zigzags, wiggles, overlaps, it don't really matter. You could do a zigzag pattern and come back. I just find a looping line probably the best, simply because this way I know I've got everything, and it makes a bunch of little voids that kind of help glue things together with a suction once you press it. And you simply go along the boat and continue that all the way down. Once you've got your glue all laid on, it's just simply a matter of making sure you have the correct number, in this case number 1, laying it on the hull. And you'll find that with the glue on the boat, things are going to be slipping and sliding all over the place. With the curve on the bottom, these pieces will be curved out, which is why you have to pin them in. And I always find it more, it just works out better if you start by lining up the stern first. So you want to be holding it right to the line you scribed earlier, and then install. You want this flush with the back. Install your skewer down in there, and then and just repeat the process as you go along the side of the boat, making sure on the inside your scribe line lines up the way you drew it. skewer down in. Keep everything in alignment. If they're too long, nip them off. These are the one piece of wood, says this in the rail, that I actually leave in the boat after it's complete, because those little pieces of wood add a little bit of strength. They don't hurt anything. There's really no reason not to. Like that, and then again up here at the bow, you want to add one. Following the line that you drew before, of course. Then go over to the other side and do the same thing. As you get to your ends, you want to put your filler blocks in as well. And it's pretty simple. You marked your side should be the top, hopefully, and then it's just, you know, same thing, looping bead of glue. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. And coming down to the point here. Same thing on this other side. I usually just stick to the top edge since it's obviously going to run down. And then obviously some glue right on the very bottom where it's going to stick to the bottom of the boat. Put that right down in place and pin it in place with a skewer. So obviously I have 8 here. I'm going to have to pump this a little more. And it doesn't have to be like tight. You know, you can see with this, I've got a little bit of wiggle room in here along the sides. The glue is actually going to swell up somewhat inside of those joints. But the real thing, all this is here for is the pressing in part. It's not for water tightness or anything like that. So these gaps around the edge are not a problem. Since I've got my second layer, I might as well glue that one in place as well. Same thing. Oops, broke the tip off. Not good. It just makes it harder to find the little plug thing when you need it. Same thing, looping line. Nothing crazy about it. Lay some glue down in there for where it's going to be actually touching the ribs here. Really doesn't touch in the middle, but a little bit of glue there won't hurt anything. Find my cap, which of course that was hard to find. And put the filler piece in there. And you know, afterwards, obviously that sticks out long, and I know that. Afterwards we'll go back and cut this off flush, and then actually we make a bow piece. That's my latest idea for how to do these. You can do it your own way, just showing you what I do. So when you get to this step, as you can see with the narrower thing, the narrower ribs, it's leaning outward. Easy fix. Piece of tape. And it will all be tied together the way you want it to. You can even do multiple pieces of tape. And that way you know it's all stuck down good. So that everything will be nice and tight. Held together the way you want. Also doesn't hurt to go ahead and do it different steps along the hull. I don't know, I figure probably right about there the skewer that I have on the forward part of the boat is, just to keep things square. This is a part of the hull that if you pull it in, it's not going to slide apart because you get skewers tying each layer down to the bottom. So doing it like that. And then of course the last part of this step, last part is why I refer to it as a stone boat. Simply put bricks all along the top rails, press the glue together in all the joints, make sure everything's stuck good and tight, and after it's cured, it will be one solid piece with very, very, very few gaps, and it will have taken the shape of the floor, the bricks on the ends, and everything exactly the way you want. Next video, I'll show you the part where I take the bricks off, take the tape off, we'll put the top deck on, the bulkheads, carrying on from there. Just showing you a little bit of the what I call the stone boat phase. Everything getting pressed out, basically the bricks, using gravity, which never fails. We'll hold the hull together, press everything together for the glue to have its best chance of getting a good bond. This boat is an experiment, so I'm probably going to go back and record the video on another build, but only because I showed it continuing to step out each layer all the way up. I normally don't build like that. I normally actually in the middle of the boat would have only the first one and maybe the second one stepped out and the rest coming straight up vertically for ease of paddling. Big reason why is human body just does not handle paddling something 36 inches wide or wider, and this works out to 34 inches wide, and I may actually have to reprofile the sides if this works out to be too awkward, but gonna float it first and find out. But yeah, normally in the middle of the cockpit I would not continue to do the fingertip width like I showed. I would only do that in the bow and stern for flare. But here you can see I've had to use multiple clamps and strips of tape. Normally I don't need the strips of tape, maybe only one clamp. This tape usually is only necessary in the ends, but this is because I'm going with thinner rails and the flare along the full length. We'll see how it works out.